By that afternoon, my email had created precisely the ripple effect I'd anticipated. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I spotted Robert in an intense conversation with Caroline, their body language tense. Moments later, our finance director Diane joined them, carrying what looked like the financial reports I'd requested earlier that week. Amanda, our social media manager, stopped by my office under the pretense of discussing a client post. "Something weird is happening," she whispered. "James has been in and out of Robert's office all afternoon, and he doesn't look happy." I nodded without elaborating. "Let's focus on the content calendar for now. The Boulder Outdoor Festival will need a coordinated approach." Throughout the day, I noticed my colleagues exchanging glances, their conversations dropping to whispers when I approached. James had been noticed. He actually looked me in the eyes and said, "I don't want our team's inexperience to waste your valuable time right in front of our biggest client." That's when I knew the gloves had to come off. What he didn't realize? I wasn't just an employee he could push around. I owned a third of the company he was so eagerly trying to reshape in his image. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It all began on a crisp autumn morning, the kind where Denver's skyline looks almost painted against the backdrop of the Rocky Mountains, and the office coffee somehow tastes better than usual. I remember straightening the framed marketing awards on my wall, awards I'd earned through 6 years of dedication to Pinnacle Marketing Group. My name, Sarah Mitchell, was etched on each one, testament to campaigns that had transformed local businesses into regional powerhouses. That morning changed everything. Robert, our CEO, had called an all-hands meeting, unusual for a Tuesday. "Big announcement," his email had said. The conference room buzzed with speculation as I slid into my usual seat, notebook ready. I'd been hoping for news about the creative director position. After all, I'd been unofficially filling that role since Thomas retired 3 months ago, on top of my duties as senior marketing strategist. The door swung open, and Robert walked in. But he wasn't alone. Behind him strode a man I'd never seen before. Tall, with carefully styled dark hair, and the kind of tailored navy suit that whispered expense rather than shouted it. His designer watch caught the fluorescent lights as he scanned the room with practiced confidence. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet James Wilson," Robert announced, his hand clapping the stranger's shoulder with unexpected familiarity. "James comes to us from Apex Creative in New York, where he's built quite the impressive portfolio. He's agreed to join our team as creative director, and I couldn't be more thrilled." My pen froze mid-word. Creative director. The position I'd been working toward for years. The position that, just last month, Robert had hinted was mine when the timing was right. I felt eyes dart toward me, then quickly away. James stepped forward, his smile revealing perfect teeth. "Thanks, Robert. I'm excited to be here in Denver. I've been following Pinnacle's work from afar, and I see tremendous potential." He paused, making deliberate eye contact around the room. When his gaze landed on me, it lingered a beat too long, assessing. "I like things bold, innovative, and results-driven. We're going to shake things up around here, take Pinnacle from a regional player to a national force." The room erupted in applause, the eager kind that always follows promises of growth and opportunity. I joined in politely, but something in my chest tightened. James spoke about our agency as if it were a fixer-upper he'd bought on the cheap, not a thriving business with loyal clients and a dedicated team. After the meeting, Robert pulled me aside. "Sarah, I want you to help James transition, show him our processes, introduce him to the key clients." His voice dropped slightly. "I know you were hoping for the position yourself, but James brings connections we need for national expansion." I nodded professionally. "Of course, Robert. Whatever helps the team." 6 years at Pinnacle had taught me when to pick my battles. As everyone filed out, James approached my desk. Up close, his confidence seemed more rehearsed, like something he put on with his tie each morning. "Sarah, right? Robert tells me you're the person who knows where all the bodies are buried." He laughed at his own joke. "I'd love to pick your brain about the client roster. Maybe you could prep dossiers on our top 10 accounts, their history, preferences, pain points. By tomorrow morning would be great." He didn't wait for my response before turning to chat with our digital team lead. Effectively dismissing me, I watched him walk away, the casual way he'd appointed himself the main character in our agency's story, and made a mental note to document everything from this day forward. What James didn't know, what almost no one at Pinnacle knew, was that I wasn't just another employee he could casually sideline. 3 years ago, when the recession had threatened to shutter our doors, I'd invested my entire inheritance to become a silent partner. My name might not have been on the door, but it was on the ownership papers. 33% of Pinnacle belonged to me. The warning signs appeared almost immediately. By his second week, James had rescheduled 3 of my client meetings, without consulting me. "Streamlining communication," he called it. I'd arrive at the office to find my calendar had been wiped clean overnight, replaced with internal sessions labeled Creative Alignment and Brand Vision Workshops, hours of circular discussions where he'd pontificate about disruption and cutting-edge approaches without ever landing on actionable strategies. During our Monday team meeting, I presented the quarter's performance metrics, highlighting a particularly successful campaign for Denver Heritage Hotels that had increased their bookings by 42% year over year. "That's fine work, Sarah," James Thatias said with the dismissive tone of someone praising a child's finger painting. "But moving forward, we need to think less regional, more national, less traditional, more disruptive." The following day, I discovered he'd reassigned 2 of my most talented team members to his pet project for a fitness app that wasn't even signed yet. When I brought this up, he waved away my concern. "We need fresh eyes on new challenges. Your accounts are stable enough to run on autopilot for a while." My accounts weren't stable. They were carefully nurtured relationships built over years of consistent delivery and trust. There was nothing autopilot about the personalized attention that had won us client loyalty in a competitive market. The most telling incident came during the brainstorming session for Colorado Craft Breweries, a collective of microbreweries that had been with us since my first year. I'd helped grow their distribution from local tap rooms to regional grocery chains, and now they were poised for multi-state expansion. "What if we position them as the authentic voice of the Rockies?" I suggested. "A craft movement that captures the pioneer spirit of Colorado, but with modern sensibilities." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We emphasize the small batch quality while building a distribution narrative that... "Let's take this in a different direction," James interrupted, leaning forward. "What if we position them as the next revolution in craft brewing? Urban, edgy, challenging the status quo. Less mountains and heritage, more innovation and disruption." I started to respond, but he continued, essentially restating my original concept with minor wording changes and taking ownership of the central idea. When our junior copywriter pointed out the similarity to my suggestion, James smiled tightly. "Great minds think alike, Sarah. But execution is what matters. And I've got some contacts at national beverage publications who can elevate this campaign." Most concerning was how he began introducing me to clients. Where I had been Sarah Mitchell, senior marketing strategist and account lead, I became our detail person, or our local market specialist. Small semantic shifts that subtly diminished my position and expertise. After a particularly frustrating meeting where James presented my campaign concept for Mountain View Resorts as his creation, I stayed late, reviewing the company records I rarely accessed. As a silent partner, I received quarterly financial reports but typically left day-to-day operations to Robert. Now I found myself scrolling through organizational charts, client contracts, and meeting minutes from the board. What I discovered was a pattern. James had been hired as part of Robert's ambitious expansion plan. The board had pushed for someone with national agency experience and high-profile connections. What they hadn't examined closely enough was his actual track record. His previous 3 positions had all lasted under 2 years, with his departure always coinciding with major account shifts or leadership reorganizations. I closed my laptop and gazed out at Denver's skyline, lights twinkling as dusk settled over the city. The quiet of the empty office gave me space to think, to remember how I'd come to be more than just an employee at Pinnacle. It was 3 years ago, during the worst economic downturn our industry had seen in a decade. Advertising budgets are always the first to be slashed during financial uncertainties, and our clients had been cutting back or disappearing altogether. Pinnacle was struggling, not failing yet, but bleeding slowly. I remember the evening clearly. We'd just landed the Colorado Craft Brewery's account after an exhaustive pitch process. It wasn't enormous, but it represented the kind of authentic regional business we excelled at serving. The team had gone out to celebrate, but Robert had remained subdued throughout dinner. As everyone else headed home, he asked if I'd walk with him. We strolled along the river, Denver's lights reflecting off the water. "Sarah, I need to be straight with you," he said finally. "That win today? It's not enough. We've lost 3 major accounts in the past quarter. The recession's hitting. Our clients hard, and I might have to make some difficult decisions about staffing next month." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "How bad is it?" He sighed. "We can weather it if we downsize by about 30%. But the team we've built, the culture, it would be years before we recovered that, even after the economy turns around." I thought about my colleagues, talented, dedicated people who'd become something like family. And I thought about the letter I'd received just 2 weeks prior, informing me that my grandmother's estate had finally cleared probate. The inheritance wasn't vast wealth, but it was substantial. Enough for the down payment on the house I'd been saving for. "What would it take?" I asked. "To avoid layoffs and keep everyone afloat until clients start spending again?" Robert looked surprised. "Honestly, a capital injection or a miracle?" The next day, I made an appointment with my financial advisor, then with Pinnacle's attorney, Caroline Hayes. By the end of the week, I had become a 33% owner of Pinnacle Marketing Group. The paperwork was discreet. I would be a silent partner, with specific voting rights and quarterly reviews. My day-to-day role remained unchanged. "Are you sure about this?" Robert had asked as we signed the final documents. "This was your house fund." I nodded. "Houses will always be there. This team, what we're building here, that's harder to replace." It was the best decision I'd ever made, not just financially, as Pinnacle recovered and grew stronger over the next few years, but personally. There's a profound difference between working for something and owning a piece of it. My perspective shifted. Every win became more meaningful, every challenge more personal. I'd kept my ownership private, not out of secrecy, but because I wanted to be valued for my work and ideas, not because I was part owner. The only people who knew were Robert, Caroline, and Robert's executive assistant who handled the confidential partnership documents. Now, watching James systematically undermine my position and the client relationships I'd built, I felt something beyond professional frustration. This wasn't just about my career trajectory or wounded pride. This was about protecting an investment, both financial and emotional, in something I had helped build. The turning point came 8 weeks after James arrived. We were preparing for the biggest pitch of the year. Alpine Sportswear, a national athletic apparel company looking to expand their mountain lifestyle line. Landing this account would be transformative for Pinnacle, potentially doubling our annual revenue and giving us the national presence Robert had been chasing. I'd been leading the preliminary discussions for months before James arrived. Alpine's marketing director was a former colleague who'd reached out specifically because of our regional expertise and authentic approach to outdoor brands. We understood the culture, the lifestyle, the values that Alpine wanted to tap into, because we lived it. I'd developed a comprehensive strategy that blended digital innovation with authentic storytelling, highlighting real outdoor enthusiasts rather than models, emphasizing sustainability alongside performance, and creating location-specific campaigns that would resonate in different mountain communities across the country. The day before the final presentation, I discovered that James had created an entirely different pitch deck, one that contradicted our established approach in fundamental ways. His concept positioned Alpine as an urban-inspired fashion brand. That happened to make outdoor gear, completely missing the authenticity that made the company distinctive in a crowded market. "James, we can't change direction the night before the presentation," I said, trying to keep my voice measured. "The Alpine team has already responded positively to our initial approach. This completely contradicts everything we've discussed with them." He barely glanced up from his monitor. "They responded positively to the idea of working with us. My approach elevates their brand beyond the regional outdoor market. Trust me, Sarah, I've worked with national apparel brands before. They talk about authenticity, but what they want is sophistication and growth." "That's not who Alpine is," I insisted. "Their whole ethos is built around authentic outdoor experiences. If we present this, we'll lose credibility." James, finally, looked at me directly, his expression cool. "The presentation is set. I've already shared a preview with Robert and he's on board. Your original materials will be available as supplementary information if questions come up about regional market specifics." I left his office seething, but resolved to be prepared for every possible scenario. I spent the night revising my original presentation, adding detailed analytics and case studies to support my approach. If James was determined to derail months of careful relationship building, I'd be ready to step in and salvage the situation. The Alpine team arrived at 10 the next morning. Their CEO, Michelle Barnes, marketing director, Tom Reeves, my former colleague, and their brand strategist, Aiden Chen. The meeting began professionally enough, with introductions and small talk. I noticed Michelle eyeing the room dynamics carefully, her sharp gaze missing nothing. "We're excited to see how you've developed the concepts we discussed," she said as we settled in, looking directly at me. "Your understanding of the authentic outdoor lifestyle was what drew us to Pinnacle in the first place." James smoothly moved to the head of the table. "Before Sarah walks you through some regional demographics, I'd like to present our overarching creative approach." He launched into his presentation without waiting for a response, highlighting sleek urban-inspired designs and celebrity partnerships, emphasizing fashion over function. The Alpine team exchanged glances as he continued, their expressions growing increasingly confused. When he reached the proposed tagline, "Alpine Beyond the Mountain," Tom actually winced. I began gathering my materials, preparing to redirect the conversation, when James paused his presentation and turned to me with a practiced smile. "Sarah has been working on some local market analysis that might provide context," he said, his tone deliberately patronizing. "Though I think the broader approach I've outlined addresses your growth objectives more effectively." I stood, ready to salvage what I could, but before I could speak, James added, "What Sarah's trying to grasp for here is a more traditional outdoor approach, but I think we should consider a more contemporary direction." He made eye contact with Michelle. "Sometimes our regional team members don't fully grasp the national market perspective." The room went silent. I felt my face flush, not from embarrassment, but from a slow-building anger. James continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Let me take over from here. I don't want our team's inexperience to waste your valuable time." Michelle's eyebrows shot up. Tom looked shocked. Aiden stopped taking notes and stared openly at James, then at me. The tension in the room crystallized into something almost tangible. In that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't defend myself. I wouldn't give James the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. Instead, I smiled pleasantly and took my seat, watching as he continued to present a strategy that fundamentally misunderstood everything about Alpine's brand identity. When the presentation ended, the Alpine team was noticeably reserved. Michelle thanked us politely but without enthusiasm. Tom, who had specifically brought Pinnacle into consideration, couldn't quite meet my eyes as they gathered their materials. "We'll be in touch," Michelle said, her tone giving nothing away. "We have several agencies to evaluate before making our decision." As our team escorted the Alpine executives to the lobby, Robert pulled me aside. "What happened in there?" he whispered. They seemed completely disconnected from James's approach. "We need to talk," I replied quietly. "But not now." When James suggested a team lunch to celebrate a successful presentation, I declined, smoothly. "I need to prepare for tomorrow's client call," I said, gathering my things with deliberate calm. My hands weren't shaking, but only through years of practiced professional composure. Robert looked concerned but didn't press the issue. As the others filed out toward the elevators, I walked calmly to my office, closed the door, and took a deep breath. The humiliation and anger I'd suppressed during the meeting threatened to surface, but I pushed it back down. This wasn't the time for emotional reactions. I drove home early, the mountains that usually brought me peace looking distant, and hazy through a thin layer of autumn smog. My condo in Lodo offered views of downtown Denver, the city I'd chosen over returning to Chicago after college, drawn by the blend of urban energy and natural beauty. Today, I barely noticed the scenery as I changed into comfortable clothes and made a cup of tea. I didn't call my sister in Seattle, though she'd been my sounding board through every professional challenge. I didn't text my best friend Mia, who would have shown up with wine and righteous indignation on my behalf. I didn't even reach out to my mentor from my first agency job, who would have offered practical advice honed from decades in the industry. This wasn't just about being undermined or publicly humiliated. This was about a pattern of behavior that threatened to undo years of work. Not just my professional standing, but the company I'd literally invested in saving. James wasn't just an arrogant new boss. He was actively damaging client relationships that had taken years to cultivate. I sat on my balcony as evening fell, laptop open, systematically documenting every incident over the past 2 months. Each time James had taken credit for my work. Each client meeting he'd rescheduled without consultation. Each team member he'd reassigned without discussing bandwidth or project priorities. Each dismissive comment and subtle undermining action. Then I pulled up files I rarely accessed, the operating agreement I'd signed 3 years ago when I became a partner. I read through the sections on management decisions, partner meetings, and conflict resolution. One clause in particular caught my attention. Major strategic decisions affecting client relationships or company valuation require review and approval from all partners, with each partner having voting rights proportional to their ownership stake. James's unilateral decision to change our approach to Alpine, potentially our largest client, clearly fell under that provision, as did his systematic reassignment of team resources away from established accounts to pursue his own initiatives. I opened a new document and began outlining a 3-part plan. By morning, my anger had cooled into something more productive: strategic resolve. First, I needed data, irrefutable evidence of the impact of James's leadership versus mine. I emailed our finance director, Diane, requesting a complete analysis of revenue by account manager for the past 2 years, along with client retention rates and profitability metrics. As a partner, this was within my rights, though I knew the request would raise eyebrows. Analyzing historical performance patterns for strategic planning, I wrote as justification. Not a lie, but not the complete truth either. Next, I scheduled a confidential meeting with Caroline Hayes, our attorney who had drafted the original partnership agreement. I needed to understand exactly what options were available to me under the operating agreement if Robert wasn't willing to address the situation. Finally, I requested the analytics from our 5 most recent campaigns, 3 led primarily by me before James arrived, and 2 that James had directed since joining Pinnacle. Numbers don't lie, and I suspected they would tell a compelling story about effectiveness, not just flash. Over the next few days, I maintained my normal routine. I didn't avoid James or act differently toward him. I attended meetings, managed my team, worked on client deliverables, and behaved as though nothing had changed. When James strode past my office without acknowledgement, I simply smiled. When he took credit for my team's social media strategy during a staff meeting, I let it pass without comment. While maintaining this calm exterior, I methodically gathered information. My meeting with Caroline confirmed what I'd suspected. James's unilateral changes to client strategy and team structure technically violated the operating agreement's requirements for partner consultation on major decisions. She seemed surprised that I was finally taking an active interest in my ownership rights after 3 years of hands-off partnership. "You've always let Robert handle day-to-day operations," she noted. "What's changed?" "The direction of the company I invested in," I replied simply. The financial data arrived midweek, and the story it told was clear. My accounts had a 42% higher retention rate than the agency average and 27% better profitability. The campaigns I'd led showed stronger long-term performance metrics, while James's initiatives had impressive launch statistics, but poor conversion rates and minimal client retention. Most telling was the feedback from our client satisfaction surveys. Accounts I managed consistently rated partnership and strategic understanding as our greatest strengths, while the few clients who had already worked primarily with James highlighted innovative ideas but flagged concerns about alignment with brand values and depth of market understanding. Armed with this information, I prepared for the quarterly ownership meeting that was technically overdue by 3 weeks. Robert had postponed it twice due to pressing client matters. I suspected those pressing matters had more to do with giving James time to establish himself without partner scrutiny. I gathered everything into a comprehensive presentation, not emotional, not accusatory, just facts and impacts presented clearly and professionally. Then I waited for the perfect moment to make my move. That opportunity came sooner than expected. The day after the Alpine presentation, Tom Reeves, my former colleague and Alpine's marketing director, called me directly rather than going through our official channels. "Sarah, what the hell happened yesterday?" he asked without preamble. That presentation was completely disconnected from everything we've discussed for the past 3 months. I chose my words carefully. There seems to have been a misalignment in our approach. I apologize for any confusion. "This isn't about confusion," Tom said, his frustration evident. "I brought Pinnacle in because of your understanding of authentic outdoor branding. That beyond the mountain concept completely misses the point of who Alpine is." Michelle is ready to walk away entirely. This was exactly what I'd feared. James had potentially cost us our biggest opportunity of the year. "I understand, Tom. Would Alpine be open to a follow-up presentation? I can personally ensure it aligns with your brand values and the strategy we originally discussed." There was a pause on the line. "I'll talk to Michelle. No promises, but I'll try. We're making our decision by the end of next week." He hung up without another word. This was the catalyst I needed. That afternoon, I sent an email to Robert, copying Caroline Hayes. The subject line was direct: "Quarterly ownership meeting request. Urgent matters for discussion." The body was equally straightforward. "As per Section 7.3 of our operating agreement, I'm formally requesting our quarterly ownership review. I have concerns about recent strategic decisions affecting client relationships and company valuation. Please confirm Thursday at 9 a.m. works for your schedule. Caroline has already confirmed her availability. I signed it with deliberate formality. Sarah Mitchell, Senior Marketing Strategist and Partner, Pinnacle Marketing Group. I clicked send and waited, anticipating the ripple effect this would create. Within 20 minutes, Robert appeared in my office doorway, his expression a mix of surprise and concern. "Can we talk privately?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder to ensure no one was within earshot. I smiled calmly. "Of course, after you confirm the meeting." His eyebrows rose at my unusual assertiveness. "Sarah, if this is about the Alpine presentation, this is about several matters outlined in our operating agreement," I interrupted gently, "including but not limited to strategic decisions made without partner consultation. The quarterly review is already overdue by 3 weeks. Thursday at 9 works for me and Caroline." Robert studied me for a moment, perhaps seeing something different in my demeanor. I maintained eye contact, my expression professional but resolute. Finally, he nodded. "I'll confirm within the hour," he said, then hesitated. "James doesn't know about your partnership stake, does he?" "No," I replied. "That information wasn't shared during his onboarding, apparently." Robert rubbed his forehead. "I should have told him." "Yes," I agreed simply. "You should have." By that afternoon, my email had set off a chain reaction. Robert had apparently called an emergency meeting with Caroline, our attorney. James had been seen pacing outside Robert's office, checking his phone repeatedly. My direct reports mentioned that James had been asking strange questions about my client history and relationship with Robert. The office atmosphere thickened with unspoken tension. At 5:47 p.m., Robert finally confirmed Thursday's meeting. By 6:15 p.m., I received my first text from James. "Sarah, can we grab coffee tomorrow? I'd like to discuss the Alpine campaign. I think we got off on the wrong foot." I didn't respond. At 8:30 p.m., he called twice. I let it go to voicemail. His message was carefully constructed. "Hey Sarah, just wanted to clear the air about some miscommunications. Let's sync up before the next client meeting. I value your regional expertise." The panic was setting in, but not for me. Wednesday. Morning brought the crisis point. Alpine Sportswear's CEO Michelle had emailed Robert and James directly. After reviewing both presentation approaches, we have concerns about the inconsistent messaging. Until we understand who's actually leading our account and which strategy Pinnacle stands behind, we're putting our contract decision on hold. The potential loss of a 7-figure contract sent shockwaves through the office. James called an emergency team meeting, pointing fingers at communication breakdowns and unclear hierarchies. He carefully avoided looking directly at me. "We need to present a unified front," he insisted, pacing the conference room. "Sarah, you'll need to align your messaging with the direction I've established for Alpine." That's when Robert stepped in, his voice unusually tight. "Actually, James, we need to discuss this further before making any decisions. The meeting's adjourned for now." As people filed out, I caught fragments of whispered conversations. "What's happening? Did you see Robert's face? Is Alpine pulling out?" The company I'd invested in, financially and emotionally, was facing a crisis, and James still had no idea of the reckoning headed his way. Thursday morning, I arrived early wearing my most confident outfit, a tailored charcoal suit with subtle red accents. I brought the complete data analysis, client testimonials, and a clear proposal for restructuring our creative leadership. The conference room felt charged with tension. Robert sat at the head of the table, Caroline to his right with legal documents spread before her. When James walked in, his step faltered slightly at seeing me already seated. "Why is Sarah here?" he asked Robert, his voice carefully controlled. I thought this was a leadership discussion about the Alpine situation. It is, Robert replied. Please have a seat, James. Caroline cleared her throat. Before we begin, I should clarify that this meeting was called under Section 7.3 of Pinnacle's operating agreement. For those not familiar, that's the provision allowing company partners to convene formal review sessions. James looked confused. Partners? I smiled. Yes, James. I've been a partner in Pinnacle for 3 years now. I own 33% of the company. The color drained from his face. That's impossible. You're a strategist. I'm both, I said simply. Now, shall we discuss the Alpine account and your recent performance assessment? James regained his composure quickly, switching tactics. This feels like a deliberate ambush, he said, straightening his tie. If Sarah had concerns about my leadership, she could have approached me directly instead of creating this. Theater. He turned to Robert. This explains the unexpected resistance to necessary changes. Sarah's been undermining my authority because she wanted my position. This is clearly a conflict of interest that should have been disclosed during my hiring process. Then he tried a different angle. The Alpine situation is unfortunate but fixable. Their hesitation has nothing to do with my approach, which is precisely what they hired us for. But with Sarah's reluctance to embrace innovative methods, the numbers show initial resistance to change, not failure. I let him talk himself, into knots, watching as he tried to rewrite reality in real time. When James finally ran out of explanations, I opened my presentation. Let's focus on facts, I said, displaying the client retention statistics, profitability metrics, and team satisfaction surveys. These aren't opinions, James. These are outcomes. I walked through each major account, highlighting the stable growth under my leadership versus the flashy but unsustainable tactics James had implemented. I showed email evidence of clients expressing confusion over his contradictory directions. Alpine isn't hesitating because of resistance to innovation, I concluded. They're hesitating because you publicly undermined the person who built their trust in Pinnacle, then presented an inconsistent strategy without understanding their market position. Robert, who had been silent throughout my presentation, finally spoke. James, when we hired you, we were looking for fresh perspective, not a complete dismantling of what works. Sarah's ownership stake aside, these results speak for themselves. Caroline added, from a legal perspective, the operating agreement gives significant weight to partner input on creative direction when it impacts client relationships. That's standard protection for investor interests. Robert made his decision clear. James, you have two options. You can step back into a standard creative director role, working collaboratively with Sarah as your equal in leadership, or we can discuss a separation package. By Monday morning, the decision had been made. James opted to leave, accepting a generous but firm separation agreement that included non-disclosure provisions. Robert called an all-staff meeting. I want to share some organizational changes, he began. James Wilson has decided to pursue other opportunities. Effective immediately, Sarah Mitchell will be taking on the role of Executive Creative Director while maintaining her strategic oversight. He continued with something I hadn't expected. I also want to recognize Sarah's long-standing commitment to Pinnacle. 3 years ago, when many agencies were closing their doors during the recession, Sarah stepped up as an investor and partner in our company. Her belief in what we're building has been both financial and creative, and today's Pinnacle stands on that foundation. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. My team members looked at me with new understanding. Later, emails and messages poured. And I had no idea you were a boss lady. Makes so much sense now. Thank you for saving our jobs back then. That afternoon, I called Michelle at Alpine. I hear you have some concerns about your account direction, I said. I'd like to address them personally. 6 months later, Pinnacle was thriving. Alpine Sportswear had not only stayed, but expanded their contract. I had restructured our creative department to pair senior strategists with creative teams, ensuring both innovation and strategic consistency. I didn't gloat or reminisce about James. His approach became a case study in our onboarding materials, unnamed but instructive on how not to lead creative teams. Most importantly, I finally stepped fully into my role as partner, moving into an office with a glass door rather than walls. Transparency became my leadership signature. During a women's leadership conference in downtown Denver, a young marketing coordinator approached me after my panel discussion. "I heard about what happened at Pinnacle," she said. "How you owned part of the company but didn't use it to get ahead until you had to. It's inspiring." I thought carefully before responding. "Ownership isn't just about having your name on paper," I told her. "It's about investing yourself fully in what you build, knowing its true value, and being prepared to stand your ground when necessary." As she nodded, I added what had become my personal mantra. Never confuse silence with weakness. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one who actually owns it. Throughout the day, I noticed my colleagues exchanging glances, their conversations dropping to whispers when I approached. James had been noticeably absent from the creative department meetings, sequestered instead in Robert's office with the blinds drawn. My direct reports mentioned that James had been asking unusual questions about my history with the company. How long had I known Robert? Had I been involved in any of the company's financial decisions? Did I have special access to the board? "He seemed really interested in how you landed the Colorado Craft Brewery's account," Amanda told me. "Wanted to know if you had some connection there or just got lucky." I simply smiled. "The pitch materials are in the shared drive if he's looking for inspiration." The office atmosphere thickened with unspoken tension. People were taking sides without even knowing what the sides were. James's recent hires clustered around his empty office, speaking in low voices. My longtime colleagues found excuses to stop by my desk, offering coffee or asking trivial questions that were really just temperature checks. At 5:47 p.m., Robert finally confirmed Thursday's meeting via email. His message was brief. "Meeting. Confirmed for Thursday, 9 a.m. Caroline will attend. Please come prepared to discuss your concerns in detail." By 6:15 p.m., I received my first text from James. "Sarah, can we grab coffee tomorrow? I'd like to discuss the Alpine campaign. I think we got off on the wrong foot." I set my phone down without responding. The Alpine situation was far beyond a coffee chat to clear the air, and we both knew it. As I gathered my things to leave, I noticed the light still on in Robert's office. He was hunched over his desk, reviewing what looked like legal documents. Our eyes met briefly through the glass wall, and he gave a tired nod. On my drive home, my phone rang twice. James calling. I let it go to voicemail, putting on my favorite podcast instead. Only after I'd changed into comfortable clothes and poured a glass of wine did I listen to his message. "Hey, Sarah. Just wanted to clear the air about some miscommunications. I think we've gotten signals crossed, especially with the Alpine presentation. Let's sync up before the next client meeting. I value your regional expertise and think we can find a way to integrate our approaches more effectively moving forward." His voice sounded carefully controlled, the message clearly rehearsed. There was no acknowledgement of his public undermining, no real apology, just strategic backpedaling. The words regional expertise stood out, still framing my 6 years of award-winning work as somehow provincial or limited. I forwarded the voicemail to my personal email for documentation, then put my phone on silent. The ball was already rolling. Thursday's meeting would happen regardless of any last-minute charm offensive James might attempt. Wednesday dawned with an unexpected development. I arrived early as usual, stopping to chat with Miguel, our front desk security who'd worked the building since before Pinnacle moved in. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, lowering his voice. "Mr. Wilson came in at 6:30 this morning, seemed in quite a hurry." I thanked him for the information and took the stairs instead of the elevator. giving myself time to prepare for whatever James might have orchestrated overnight. When I reached our floor, I found James and Robert already in the conference room, laptops open between them. Through the glass, I could see Robert shaking his head repeatedly while James gestured with increasing animation. My email pinged almost the moment I sat down at my desk. It was from Michelle Barnes, Alpine Sportswear's CEO, addressed to Robert and James, with my email in the CC field. After reviewing both presentation approaches and subsequent discussions, with our team, Alpine Sportswear has significant concerns about the inconsistent messaging and strategy presented by Pinnacle. The original concepts discussed with Sarah over the past 3 months aligned with our brand values and growth objectives. However, the presentation delivered by James presented a fundamentally different direction that contradicts our core identity as an authentic outdoor brand. Until we understand who's actually leading our account and which strategy Pinnacle officially stands behind, we're putting our contract decision on hold. We had hoped to finalize agency selection by month's end, but will extend our timeline if necessary to ensure the right partnership. Please clarify your agency's position and account leadership by Friday if you wish to remain in consideration. The email landed like a bomb. Within minutes, James was striding toward my office, his carefully cultivated calm visibly fractured. Robert intercepted him in the hallway, guiding him instead toward the smaller meeting room away from the open office area. Through the glass, I could see their heated conversation, James gesturing at his phone while Robert held up placating hands. By mid-morning, word had spread throughout the office. Alpine, our potential biggest client, the account that could transform Pinnacle from regional player to national agency, was wavering, and somehow I was involved. Lisa from the media team stopped by, ostensibly to ask about ad placements, but really to fish for information. So, heard anything about the Alpine account? People are saying things got complicated after yesterday's presentation. I kept my response professional. All major accounts have complexities. I'm sure it will work out for the best. At 11:30, James called an emergency team meeting. The creative department, account managers, and strategy team all crowded into the main conference room. James stood at the head of the table, his suit jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up as if preparing for battle. "We need to address some communication breakdowns that have occurred," he began, his voice forcibly controlled. "The Alpine account represents a significant opportunity for Pinnacle, and we're currently dealing with some messaging inconsistencies that have confused the client." He paced as he spoke, never quite making eye contact with me. "Moving forward, all client communications need to align with the overall brand direction we've established. Sarah's regional market insights are valuable, but they need to integrate with our broader national strategy." It was fascinating watching him try to establish control while simultaneously backpedaling. The narrative he was crafting positioned the Alpine situation as a simple miscommunication rather than his wholesale rejection of 3 months of relationship building. "We need to present a unified front," he continued, voice rising slightly. "Sarah, you'll need to align your messaging with the direction I've established for Alpine. We can incorporate some of your local market elements, but the overall positioning needs to remain consistent with what I presented." He was still operating under the assumption that he had the authority to dictate approach, that his position as creative director trumped my established client relationship. More importantly, he still had no idea that I owned a third of the company. I remained silent, taking notes and watching my colleagues' reactions. Some nodded along, particularly the newer hires James had brought in. Others looked uncomfortable, glancing between James and me with uncertainty. Just as James began assigning action items, Robert stepped into the room. His expression was grave, his normally friendly demeanor replaced by something more businesslike. "Actually, James, we need to discuss this further before making any decisions. The meeting's adjourned for now. Sarah, could you stay behind, please?" Everyone else, thank you for your time. As people filed out, confusion evident on their faces, I caught fragments of whispered conversations. What's happening? Did you see Robert's face? Is Alpine pulling out completely? Why does Sarah need to stay? James remained at the head of the table, his knuckles white against the polished surface. Robert closed the door behind the last departing team member and turned to face us both. Alpine has requested direct communication with Sarah about their account, he said without preamble. Michelle Barnes called me personally after sending that email. She specifically wants Sarah to clarify our strategic approach. James's jaw tightened. As creative director, I should be the one to... They've requested Sarah, Robert interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. Their exact words were, "We want to hear from the person who understood our brand from the beginning." The implication hung in the air. After a single presentation, James had potentially lost the trust of our biggest prospective client. Worse, they were specifically requesting the person he had publicly undermined. "This is completely irregular," James protested. "Account leadership should remain consistent. I'm happy to incorporate Sarah's local market insights, but Sarah will handle the Alpine communication," Robert said firmly. "She'll draft a response today, which I'll review before it goes out." He turned to me. "Can you have something ready by 3 p.m.? I nodded, gathering my materials. Of course. As I stood to leave, James made one last attempt. "Robert, can we discuss this privately? There are leadership considerations here that..." "We'll discuss everything tomorrow morning," Robert cut in, checking his watch. 8 a.m. before the partnership meeting. James froze. "Partnership meeting?" Robert glanced at me, then back to James. "We have some company business to review. Nothing for you to worry about right now. Let's focus on salvaging the Alpine situation first." I left them there, James looking increasingly confused, and Robert carefully avoiding further explanation. As I walked back to my office, I felt a strange sense of calm. The company I'd invested in, financially and emotionally, was facing a crisis point. And James still had no idea of the reckoning headed his way. Back at my desk, I began drafting the response to Alpine. It needed to be diplomatic yet honest, acknowledging the mixed messages while reaffirming the strategy we'd originally developed. Together. I was careful not to throw James under the bus explicitly. That would reflect poorly on Pinnacle as a whole. But I made it clear which approach had been developed with Alpine's core values in mind. The first reply came from Tom, within an hour of sending the email. "Thanks for the clarification, Sarah. This aligns much better with what we've been discussing. Michelle would like to schedule a call with you specifically tomorrow to discuss next steps. Let me know your availability." I forwarded the response to Robert with a brief note. Alpine responding positively. "Request for call tomorrow. Recommend." Scheduling after our morning meeting. His reply came back immediately. "Confirmed. Good work, Sarah. See you tomorrow at 9 a.m. As the workday wound down, the office hummed with subdued speculation. James remained sequestered in his office, blinds drawn. I noticed several of the account managers huddled near the kitchen, conversation stopping abruptly when I approached to refill my water bottle. "Everything okay?" I asked pleasantly. They exchanged glances before Nicole, our longest-serving account director, spoke up. "Just wondering what's happening with Alpine. There are rumors." I kept my expression neutral. Client relationships sometimes have complications. I'm sure it will all be resolved soon. As I turned to leave, Nicole touched my arm lightly. "Hey, for what it's worth, everyone who saw what happened in that presentation is on your side. What he did wasn't right." I thanked her with a small smile, neither confirming nor denying there were sides to be taken. The company dynamics were shifting rapidly, fault lines appearing that would soon crack wide open. That evening, I prepared meticulously for the morning meeting. I organized my documentation chronologically, highlighting instances where James had made unilateral decisions that affected client relationships. I prepared slides showing the comparative performance metrics of accounts I managed versus those James had taken over. I included testimonials from clients who had specifically mentioned our understanding of their brand values as the reason for choosing Pinnacle. Most importantly, I reviewed the sections of the operating agreement that outlined partner rights and responsibilities. I wasn't going into this meeting as an employee defending her position. I was going in as an owner protecting her investment. I laid out my most professional outfit for the morning, a tailored charcoal suit with subtle red accents that I reserved for major pitches and presentations. This would be every bit as important as winning a new client. More so, perhaps, because it was about establishing the fundamental direction of the company I'd helped save. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I found myself mentally rehearsing different scenarios, preparing responses for various reactions James might have. Would he be angry? Dismissive? Would he try to charm his way through, reframing my concerns as misunderstandings? Or would he attempt to undermine me yet again, painting me as resistant to change or innovation? By morning, I felt strangely calm. Whatever happened in that meeting room, I knew I stood on solid ground, legally, ethically, and professionally. I'd done the work, built the relationships, and quite literally invested in Pinnacle's success. I'd earned my place at that table in every possible way. I arrived at the office at 8:30, intentionally giving myself time to settle in before the meeting. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the awards wall where several plaques bore my name. I straightened my jacket, checked my reflection quickly in my phone camera, and gathered my materials. As I approached the conference room, I could hear raised voices through the door, Robert and James already engaged in what sounded like a heated discussion. I paused, not wanting to interrupt, but Caroline spotted me through the glass and motioned me in. The conference room felt charged with tension. Robert sat at the head of the table, looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. Caroline was to his right, legal documents spread before her. When James saw me enter, his step faltered slightly. "Why is Sarah here?" he asked Robert, his voice carefully controlled despite the obvious tension in his shoulders. "I thought this was a leadership discussion about the Alpine situation." "It is," Robert replied evenly. "Please have a seat, James." I took my place directly across from James, setting my portfolio and tablet neatly on the table. Caroline cleared her throat, her expression professionally neutral as always. "Before we begin, I should clarify that this meeting was called under Section 7(3) of Pinnacle's operating agreement," she stated, sliding a document toward the center of the table. "For those not familiar, that's the provision allowing company partners to convene formal review sessions of strategic decisions and leadership actions." James looked confused, glancing between Robert and Caroline. "Partners? I don't understand. This is about the Alpine account, right?" Robert looked at me, clearly indicating this was my moment to speak. I met James's gaze directly, my voice calm and clear. "Yes, James. I've been a partner in Pinnacle for 3 years now. I own 33% of the company." The color drained from his face, his carefully maintained composure cracking visibly. "That's impossible. You're a strategist." "I'm both," I said simply, opening my portfolio. "Now, shall we discuss the Alpine account and your recent performance assessment? I believe there are some fundamental issues with your approach that have put client relationships at risk." James's eyes darted to Robert, perhaps looking for contradiction or support. Finding neither, he straightened in his chair, adjusting his tie in what seemed like an automatic gesture. "This feels like an ambush," he said, voice hardening. "If there were concerns about my leadership approach, they could have been addressed directly, not through some procedural technicality." I maintained my professional demeanor, neither defensive nor aggressive. "The operating agreement isn't a technicality, James. It's the foundational document governing how Pinnacle operates, particularly regarding decisions that affect client relationships and company valuation, both of which are at issue with the Alpine situation. Caroline nodded, indicating a specific clause in the document before them. Section 5.2 specifically states that major account strategy changes require partner consultation when the potential revenue exceeds 15% of annual projections. The Alpine account clearly meets that threshold. James seemed to be recalibrating rapidly, his expression shifting from shock to calculation. He turned to Robert. "This explains the resistance I've encountered to necessary modernization," he said, leaning forward intently. "If Sarah has been undermining my authority because she wanted my position, that's a conflict of interest that should have been disclosed during my hiring process." Robert began to respond, but I intervened smoothly. "Let's be clear about the timeline, James. I became a partner 3 years ago when the company needed capital infusion during the recession. I've never sought the creative director position. My partnership interest has always been separate from my operational role. What I have sought is strategic consistency and respect for the client relationships I've built." I opened my tablet and displayed the first slide of my presentation, a simple graph showing client retention rates by account manager. "Rather than making this personal, let's focus on performance metrics. These aren't opinions, James. These are outcomes." For the next 15 minutes, I methodically walked through the data I'd compiled. The comparative performance of accounts I managed versus those James had influenced. The testimonials from clients specifically mentioning our understanding of their brand values as the reason for choosing Pinnacle. The concerning patterns in James's approach to established client relationships. "Alpine isn't hesitating because of resistance to innovation," I concluded. "They're hesitating because you publicly undermined the person who built their trust in Pinnacle, then presented an inconsistent strategy without understanding their market position." Throughout my presentation, James had grown increasingly tense, his initial shock hardening into something more defensive. When I finished, he leaned forward, hands clasped on the table. "This feels very carefully crafted to paint me as the villain," he said, voice tight. "What you're calling undermining is simply bringing a national perspective to a regional agency. Yes, I've pushed for change. That's exactly what Robert hired me to do. To elevate Pinnacle beyond its current limitations." He turned to Robert, appealing directly to him. "You brought me in specifically to help Pinnacle grow beyond the regional market. Every decision I've made has been in service of that goal. The Alpine situation is unfortunate but fixable. Their hesitation has nothing to do with my approach, which is precisely what they hired us for, but with these internal power struggles." Robert, who had been silent throughout my presentation, finally spoke. His voice carried the weight of someone seeing a situation with painful clarity. "James, when we hired you, we were looking for fresh perspective, not a complete dismantling of what works. Yes, I wanted national growth, but not at the expense of what made Pinnacle successful in the first place." He sighed heavily. "Sarah's ownership stake aside, these results speak for themselves. Client relationships are the lifeblood of an agency, and they're built on trust and understanding." Caroline, ever the pragmatist, added her perspective. "From a legal standpoint, the operating agreement gives significant weight to partner input on creative direction when it impacts client relationships. That's standard protection for investor interests. Sarah's concerns have merit under the terms of the agreement." James made one last attempt, shifting tactics entirely. "If this is about communication styles, I'm happy to adapt. Perhaps I've been too focused on results and not enough on process. We can integrate approaches, my innovation with Sarah's client knowledge." Robert shook his head slowly. "James, this goes beyond communication styles. This is about respect for colleagues, understanding of client needs, and alignment with Pinnacle's values." He glanced at me, then back to James. "You have two options. You can step back into a standard creative director role, working collaboratively with Sarah as your equal in leadership, or we can discuss a separation package." The ultimatum hung in the air. James looked genuinely shocked, as if he'd never considered this outcome possible. For a moment, I almost felt sympathy. He clearly hadn't been given the full picture of Pinnacle's ownership structure before taking the position. That was on Robert, not him. But sympathy only stretched so far. James had created this situation through his own actions. The dismissive comments, the public undermining, the unilateral decisions that disregarded established client relationships. He'd walked in assuming authority he hadn't earned and treating experienced professionals as obstacles rather than resources. After a long moment, James stood. "I'll need time to consider my options," he said stiffly. Robert nodded. "Take the rest of the day. We'll need your decision by tomorrow morning." As James gathered his things, he paused, looking directly at me. "You could have said something from the beginning. Partner." The last word carried an edge of bitterness. I met his gaze steadily. "I shouldn't have needed to, James. My work and my results should have spoken for themselves." He left without another word, the door closing firmly behind him. The conference room felt unnaturally quiet after James left. Robert exhaled slowly, running a hand through his graying hair. That could have gone better. Caroline gathered her legal documents, tapping them into a neat stack. Actually, it went exactly as expected. Clear presentation of facts, defined. Options, professional delivery. She glanced at me with something like approval. "Well handled, Sarah." "What happens now?" I asked, already thinking about damage control for the team, reassuring clients, and of course, salvaging the Alpine. "Opportunity." Robert checked his watch. "Now, we see if James makes the rational choice or the emotional one. Either way, we need to prepare for both scenarios." He turned to me, his expression more open than it had been in weeks. "Sarah, I owe you an apology. I should have been more transparent with James about the ownership structure from the beginning. And I should have stepped in sooner when I saw how he was positioning himself." I appreciated the acknowledgement, but stayed focused on the path forward. "We need to contact Alpine right away." Michelle specifically requested a call to discuss next steps. "Set it up," Robert agreed. "Draft an official response from Pinnacle clarifying our strategic approach. Make it clear which direction we stand behind without explicitly throwing James under the bus." I nodded, already composing the message in my head. "And the team? They've noticed something's happening." Robert considered this. "Let's wait until we have James's decision before making any announcements. For now, just focus on the Alpine situation and your regular accounts." As we left the conference room, I noticed several colleagues quickly averting their eyes, pretending they hadn't been watching through the glass walls. Office gossip would already be circulating, theories building on fragments of overheard conversations, and observed body language. I smiled politely as I passed, maintaining professional composure while internally processing the seismic shift that had just occurred. Back at my desk, I drafted the email to Alpine, carefully threading the needle. Between reassurance and honesty, I emphasized Pinnacle's commitment to the original strategic approach we'd developed together, framing the presentation discrepancy as an internal misalignment that had been resolved. I requested a video call with Michelle and her team to personally walk through the refined campaign strategy. After Robert approved the message, I sent it and turned my attention to my team. They clearly sensed something significant had happened, their questions thinly veiled behind work-related queries. "Should we continue with the Mountain View Resort social calendar as planned?" Amanda asked, hovering in my doorway. What she really meant was, "Are our strategic directions changing?" "Absolutely," I confirmed. "The approach we developed is still our go-forward strategy." The relief on her face was immediate. By mid-afternoon, Alpine had responded. Michelle agreed to a video call the following morning. "Looking forward to clarity," she wrote, her tone noticeably warmer than in her previous email. It wasn't a guaranteed win, but it was a lifeline we desperately needed. James didn't return to the office that day. His absence created a strange vacuum, conversation in the creative department flowing more freely without his monitoring presence. I heard genuine laughter from the design team for the first time in weeks, as they collaborated on concepts for an outdoor recreation client. As the workday wound down, Nicole stopped by my office again. "So?" she began, leaning against the door frame. "Word is that James might not be coming back." I kept my expression neutral. "Nothing's been decided yet. We're working through some strategic adjustments." She nodded slowly, reading between the lines. For what it's worth, most of us have noticed how things have gone since he arrived. The atmosphere, the constant pivoting, the way certain people were being sidelined. She gave me a meaningful look. "I've been here almost as long as you have, Sarah. This place was different before. Better." I appreciated her loyalty, but maintained professional boundaries. Change is always challenging. We'll find the right balance. After Nicole left, I found myself staring at the Denver skyline through my office window, watching as the late afternoon sun gilded the buildings. Pinnacle occupied the 11th floor of a downtown high-rise, our corner offices offering views of both the urban landscape and the distant mountains. I'd always loved this dual perspective, the energy of the city combined with the enduring presence of the Rockies. It felt symbolic of what made Pinnacle special. We understood both business momentum and lasting value. James had only seen the first part, focused on speed and flash without appreciating the foundation beneath it. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "James just called. Wants to meet first thing tomorrow to discuss terms. Prepare for either outcome." I responded with a simple thumbs-up emoji, then gathered my things to leave. The day had been emotionally exhausting, layers of professional conflict and personal vindication intertwining in ways I was still processing. As I walked toward the elevator, I passed James's office. The door was open, his desk untouched since morning, family photos and design awards still arranged in perfect symmetry. For a moment, I felt a twinge of regret, not for standing my ground, but for the wasted potential. James clearly had talent and connections that could have benefited Pinnacle if he'd approached his role differently, with respect for what existed before him and collaboration rather than conquest. The next morning arrived with a crispness that matched my mood, clear, bright, and sharply defined. I dressed with particular care, choosing a deep blue suit that projected both confidence and approachability, perfect for both the James situation and the subsequent Alpine call. I arrived early, wanting time to center myself before the day's confrontations. To my surprise, Robert was already in the conference room, coffee in hand, reviewing documents. "James will be here at 8, he said without preamble. "Caroline's joining us as well. How are you feeling about all this?" The question caught me slightly off guard. Robert and I had maintained a professionally friendly relationship over the years, but he rarely asked about my emotional state. "Prepared," I answered honestly, "and ready to move forward, whatever direction that takes." He nodded, seeming to approve of my pragmatism. "For what it's worth, I think you've handled this whole situation remarkably well. Many people would have reacted more emotionally after what happened in that Alpine presentation." I smiled slightly. "I'm saving my emotions for after we secure the account." At precisely 8 o'clock, James arrived. The contrast with his first appearance at Pinnacle couldn't have been starker. Gone was the easy confidence, the commanding presence. Today, he moved with contained tension, his expression carefully neutral. He'd chosen a charcoal suit, more subdued than his usual bold styling. Caroline joined us moments later, legal folder in hand. The four of us sat in a configuration that felt more like a negotiation than a meeting. Robert and Caroline on one, side, James across from them, me at the end of the table, equidistant from both parties. "I've given our discussion considerable thought," James began without preamble. "While I maintain that my approach would ultimately benefit Pinnacle's growth trajectory, I recognize that there are established dynamics I wasn't fully briefed on when accepting this position." He placed a folder on the table, sliding it toward Robert. "These are my terms for separation. I believe they're reasonable given the circumstances." Robert raised an eyebrow, surprised by the directness. He opened the folder, scanning the document inside before passing it to Caroline. "You've decided against the option to continue in a collaborative leadership role?" James's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's be realistic. That arrangement would be untenable for everyone involved. Better to make a clean break." I felt a complex mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief that we wouldn't be forced into an awkward power-sharing situation. Disappointment that he couldn't see value in collaboration. It confirmed what I'd suspected from the beginning. James was interested in control, not contribution. Caroline reviewed the document carefully. "The financial terms are within standard parameters for executive separation. The non-compete clause is acceptable. However," she tapped a paragraph near the bottom, "this mutual non-disparagement section needs revision. It's overly broad and would potentially restrict Pinnacle from providing factual information to clients regarding account transitions." James's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I believe it's in everyone's best interest to present this as a mutual and amicable separation. We can craft language that's factual without being disparaging," I suggested, speaking for the first time. "Clients deserve transparency about strategic direction, without unnecessary details about personnel changes." Robert nodded in agreement. "Sarah's right. We'll need to explain the shift in approach to Alpine and others. We can do that professionally without getting into specifics about why you're leaving." After some negotiation on specific wording, Caroline produced a revised agreement that satisfied all parties. As she and James stepped out to make final adjustments to the document, Robert turned to me. "You'll need to take point on the creative department effective immediately," he said. "Are you ready for that?" I'd been preparing for this possibility since yesterday's meeting, mapping out immediate priorities and transition plans. "Yes. I'll focus on stabilizing the team first, then work on integrating some of James's innovative approaches with our established processes. Not everything he brought was wrong, just the implementation." Robert looked impressed. "That's remarkably objective given everything that's happened." I shrugged slightly. "It's not personal, it's business, and my business is making sure Pinnacle succeeds." After James and Caroline returned with the finalized agreement, we all signed the necessary documents. The actual separation process took less than 30 minutes, a surprisingly anticlimactic end to weeks of tension. As James stood to leave, he paused, looking directly at me. "For what it's worth, your work is actually quite good. Regional doesn't necessarily mean limited." It was as close to an apology as his pride would allow. I nodded in acknowledgement. "Your innovative perspective had value too. It was the delivery that needed work. Not quite an olive branch, but a professional recognition of the talent beneath the problematic behavior." After he left, Robert leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Well, that's one crisis managed. Now we need to secure Alpine and stabilize the team." I checked my watch. The call with Alpine was scheduled in 45 minutes. "I should prepare for Michelle's call. What are we telling the team about James?" Robert considered this. "The truth, but professionally packaged. James has decided to pursue other opportunities. Effective immediately, you'll be taking on the role of Executive Creative Director while maintaining your strategic oversight. We appreciate his contributions and wish him well." He paused. "We should also acknowledge your partnership stake. It's time to be transparent about that." I hadn't expected this suggestion. Are you sure? It's never been public knowledge before. It should have been, Robert said firmly. Maybe if people had known you had a literal ownership stake in Pinnacle's success, situations like this wouldn't arise. Besides, you've earned the recognition, not just as an investor but as someone who believed in this company enough to put your own future on the line. The Alpine call went better than I could have hoped. Michelle was direct but receptive, particularly when I walked her through our refined strategy that maintained the authentic outdoor positioning while incorporating some of the more innovative digital approaches from James's presentation. "This feels right," she said after I'd finished my presentation. "It's what attracted us to Pinnacle in the first place. You understand who we are but aren't afraid to push us forward." Tom, who had championed Pinnacle from the beginning, looked visibly relieved. "Just to be clear," he asked, "you'll be our primary contact moving forward, correct?" I confirmed this, explaining briefly that James had left the agency to pursue other opportunities. Michelle nodded, seeming satisfied with this explanation. "We'll need the revised proposal by next Wednesday," she said. "But I think we're back on track." After ending the call, I allowed myself a moment of relief. Alpine wasn't guaranteed yet, but we were back in serious contention. Now came the equally challenging task of addressing the team. Robert called an all-staff meeting for 11 o'clock. As people filed into the large conference room, I could sense their curiosity and apprehension. Office gossip had clearly been working overtime. Everyone knew something significant had happened, but the details remained murky. Robert stood at the front of the room, projecting his usual confident leadership presence. "Thank you all for gathering on short notice. I have several important announcements to share today." He began with the news everyone was expecting. First, James Wilson has decided to pursue other opportunities. This was a mutual decision reached after careful consideration of Pinnacle's strategic direction. We appreciate his contributions and wish him success in his future endeavors. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some people exchanged knowing glances, while others looked genuinely surprised. Robert continued before speculation could build. Effective immediately, Sarah Mitchell will be taking on the role of Executive Creative Director while maintaining her strategic oversight. Many of you have worked directly with Sarah over her 6 years with Pinnacle and know her talent, dedication, and vision firsthand. He paused, making eye contact with me before continuing with the revelation that would permanently alter how my colleagues saw me. "I also want to recognize Sarah's long-standing commitment to Pinnacle that goes beyond her professional contributions. 3 years ago, when many agencies were closing their doors during the recession, Sarah stepped up as an investor and partner in our company. Her belief in what we're building has been both financial and creative, and today's Pinnacle stands on that foundation." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. My team members looked at me with new understanding, questions forming in their eyes. I hadn't prepared for this moment, hadn't considered how it would feel to have this private aspect of my relationship with Pinnacle suddenly made public. As Robert concluded the meeting and people began to disperse, I found myself surrounded by colleagues with questions and congratulations. "Had no idea you were a boss lady," Amanda said, eyes wide with admiration. "Makes so much sense now." Miguel from the design team nodded. "You've always acted like you had skin in the game." Nicole simply squeezed my arm as she passed. "About time," she whispered. The most touching comment came from David, our senior copywriter who had been with Pinnacle almost as long as I had. "Thank you for saving our jobs back then," he said, quietly. "Some of us suspected something happened during that rough patch, but we never knew it was you who stepped up." Throughout the day, emails and messages continued to arrive, expressions of congratulations, support, and in some cases, apologies from those who had aligned with James during the office's unofficial divide. I responded to each one with grace, emphasizing that Pinnacle's strength had always been our collective talent. not any individual. By late afternoon, I finally had a moment alone in my office, now the Executive Creative Director's office, to process the day's events. The title change was gratifying, but it was the public acknowledgement of my ownership stake that felt most significant. For 3 years, I'd been a silent partner, my investment known only to Robert and a select few. Now my dual role was transparent, my commitment to Pinnacle recognized not just financially, but publicly. I thought back to the intimidated but determined woman I'd been 3 years ago, writing that inheritance check, exchanging a personal dream of home ownership for something less tangible, but ultimately more meaningful. Investment in my professional home and the people who made it special. That afternoon, I called Michelle at Alpine again. "I hear you have some additional questions about the campaign direction," I said. "I'd like to address them personally." "Sarah," she responded warmly, "I appreciate the follow-up. After our call this morning, we've decided to move forward with Pinnacle. Your understanding of our brand values combined with your fresh strategic direction is exactly what we've been looking for." The word fresh caught my attention, the quality James had been so intent on claiming as exclusively his. "Michelle," continued, "we'll need to move quickly on the launch timeline. Can your team handle an accelerated schedule?" "Absolutely," I assured her, already mentally reorganizing resources and timelines. "I'll have a detailed production calendar to you by tomorrow." After we said goodbye, I sat at my desk, looking out at Denver's skyline. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city, the mountains beyond turning purple in the fading light. For the first time in weeks, I felt completely present in my role, both roles, at Pinnacle. The next few days passed in a blur of transition activities. I restructured the creative department, pairing senior strategists with creative teams to ensure both innovation and strategic consistency. I personally reached out to each major client, reassuring them about Pinnacle's direction while introducing subtle improvements to our processes. Most importantly, I scheduled individual meetings with every team member, listening to their experiences over the past 2 months, acknowledging pain points, and incorporating their ideas into our revised workflow. These conversations revealed patterns I hadn't fully appreciated. James had cultivated favorites while isolating others, created unnecessary competition between teams, and frequently dismissed ideas from women and junior staff members. Healing. These divisions wouldn't happen overnight, but acknowledging them was the essential first step. By Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after the confrontation that had changed everything, I felt the office atmosphere beginning to shift. Conversations in the creative bullpen flowed more naturally. Collaborative sessions yielded robust discussion, rather than nervous agreement. People lingered in common areas, rebuilding the casual connections that had been strained under James's divisive leadership. Robert stopped by my office as I was reviewing Alpine campaign materials. "The board is impressed with how smoothly you've handled the transition," he said, taking a seat opposite my desk. "And landing Alpine despite everything. That's significant." "The team deserves the credit," I replied. "They've been incredibly adaptable." He nodded in acknowledgement, then leaned forward slightly. "I've been thinking about our partnership structure. With James's departure, we have an opportunity to revisit some aspects of Pinnacle's leadership model. The board is interested in creating a more formal executive role for you, something that acknowledges both your creative leadership and your ownership stake." "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, curious about where this was heading. "Chief Creative Officer," Robert said simply, "overseeing all creative and strategic output with direct board representation. We'd bring in a new creative director to handle day-to-day department management, freeing you to focus on high-level strategy and key client relationships." It was a significant promotion and a formal acknowledgement of the influence I'd been quietly exercising for years. "I'd need to see how it's structured," I said, ever the strategist. particularly the relationship between creative direction and business development. Robert smiled. I thought you might say that. Caroline's already drafting the position parameters. We can review them next week. He stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I think this is overdue. You've been functioning at this level for a while now, just without the title or compensation. After he left, I turned to look out at the mountain view, watching as alpenglow painted the distant peaks in shades of pink and gold. The scene reminded me of Alpine Sportswear's core brand concept: authentic connection to natural beauty, respecting tradition while embracing innovation. It seemed fitting that they had become the catalyst for Pinnacle's own evolution. My phone buzzed with a message from Amanda. Team's heading to Cooper's for happy hour to celebrate Alpine. You coming, boss lady? I smiled at the new nickname that had quickly spread throughout the office. The old Sarah might have declined, maintaining professional distance. But the events of the past week had shifted something fundamental in how I viewed my role at Pinnacle. Ownership wasn't just about having equity, it was about being fully present, fully invested in both the work and the people. Be there in 20, I replied, saving my files and gathering my things. As I walked through the creative department, I noticed the energy had completely transformed from the tense, guarded atmosphere of James's tenure. People were laughing, collaborating, creating with renewed purpose. This was the Pinnacle I'd invested in, not just financially, but emotionally and professionally. Outside, Denver's evening was coming alive, the streets filling with people heading to dinner or after-work gatherings. As I walked the few blocks to Cooper's, I reflected on how differently this week could have ended. If I hadn't documented everything, if I hadn't known my rights under the operating agreement, if I'd allowed James's public undermining to silence me, Pinnacle might be having a very different happy hour tonight. The lesson wasn't about confrontation or even vindication. It was about knowing your worth, understanding your power, and being willing to stand firm when both are challenged. I hadn't sought this showdown, but when it became inevitable, I'd faced it with preparation, professionalism, and the quiet confidence that comes from truly knowing the value you bring. Cooper's was already crowded when I arrived, but I spotted our team immediately, gathered around several pushed-together, high-top tables, animated conversations flowing as freely as the craft beers the bar was known for. A cheer went up when they saw me, genuine warmth in their welcome that transcended typical boss-employee dynamics. As I joined them, accepting the congratulatory toast Amanda insisted on, I felt a sense of rightness settle over me. This was where I belonged, not as the silent partner operating in the background, but as a visible leader who had earned her place through talent, resilience, and a willingness to invest in something bigger than herself. The Alpine account was just the beginning. With my new role and the team's renewed energy, Pinnacle was poised for the national expansion Robert had been chasing. But we'd do it our way, building on the authentic client relationships and strategic insight that had always been our foundation. James had gotten one thing right. Pinnacle did need to evolve, but evolution doesn't mean abandoning your core identity. It means adapting and growing while staying true to your fundamental strengths. As I looked around at my colleagues, now fully aware of my dual role as leader and owner, I knew we'd found the perfect balance between honoring our roots and embracing our future. 6 months later, Pinnacle Marketing Group had transformed. The agency that had once fought to maintain its regional clientele now dominated the Mountain West market and had expanded its reach to national accounts with a distinctive approach that blended authentic storytelling with innovative digital strategies. We had outgrown our original office space and leased the entire 11th floor, the expanding team requiring new workspace solutions and a completely redesigned creative studio. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new office, no longer tucked away in a corner but positioned at the intersection of the creative department and the strategy team, glass walls making me visible and accessible to everyone. The redesign had been intentional, a physical manifestation of Pinnacle's new leadership philosophy: transparent, collaborative, and integrated. I set my coffee down and opened my laptop, reviewing the agenda for our executive team meeting. As Chief Creative Officer, a title I'd officially held for 4 months now, I oversaw not just creative output, but the strategic vision that drove all client work. The role fulfilled both sides of my connection to Pinnacle: the creative strategist, who had built award-winning campaigns, and the owner with a vested interest in the company's long-term success. Rebecca, my executive assistant, appeared in the doorway. "Your 9 a.m. is here," she announced, and Robert asked if you could stop by his office before the leadership meeting. I nodded, closing my laptop. "Thanks, Rebecca. Send them in." The 9 a.m. was Eliza Harding, a promising young marketing graduate I'd been interviewing for our associate strategist position. Her portfolio showed remarkable insight, particularly her thesis project analyzing brand authenticity across outdoor apparel companies. Her final interview was with me, a step we'd added to our hiring process to ensure cultural fit and long-term potential. "Good morning, Ms. Mitchell," Eliza said as she entered, confidence in her handshake despite the natural nervousness in her eyes. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me." "Please, call me Sarah," I replied, gesturing to the seating area by the window rather than keeping the desk between us. "And thank you for coming back for this final conversation. Your portfolio is impressive." We spent 30 minutes discussing her approach to marketing challenges, her career aspirations, and the values that drove her work. Something in her reminded me of myself 6 years ago, the blend of ambition and principle, creativity and analytical thinking. "Can I ask you something a bit different?" she said toward the end of our conversation. "The case study on Alpine, sportswear in your portfolio presentation, that was extraordinary work. The way you blended regional authenticity with national scalability while maintaining brand integrity. It's exactly the kind of strategic thinking I hope to develop. How did you approach that challenge?" I smiled, remembering the complicated journey that had led to that particular case study. The Alpine campaign was a watershed moment for Pinnacle, actually. It taught us that the strongest strategies don't compromise identity for growth. They amplify what makes a brand distinctive while opening new pathways for connection. I paused, considering how much of the backstory to share. It also reminded us that the best ideas can come from anywhere, but they need confident champions to bring them to life. After Eliza left, I headed to Robert's office, curious about what he wanted to discuss before our leadership meeting. I found him reviewing quarterly projections, reading glasses perched low on his nose. At 62, he'd started talking about succession planning, though retirement still seemed like a distant concept for someone with his energy. "Sarah," he greeted me warmly, removing his glasses. "Have a seat. How did the final interview go?" "Well, she's sharp, values-driven, and asks excellent questions. I think she'd be a strong addition to the team." He nodded, seeming pleased but distracted. Good. Listen, there's something I wanted to discuss privately before the leadership meeting." He pulled a folder from his desk drawer. "The board has been reviewing our 5-year growth strategy, particularly the expansion opportunities in the Pacific Northwest and California markets." This wasn't news. We'd been exploring Western expansion for months, researching potential locations and analyzing market gaps where Pinnacle's approach could gain traction. "We've been presented with an interesting opportunity," Robert continued, opening the folder to reveal acquisition documents. "Westridge Creative in Seattle is looking for a buyer. They're well established in the tech and outdoor sectors, with a strong client roster and excellent creative reputation. Their founder is retiring, and they're seeking a larger agency with compatible values to take over." I reviewed the materials, immediately seeing the strategic value. Westridge's specialization in tech clients would complement Pinnacle's strengths in outdoor and lifestyle brands. Their Seattle location would give us immediate presence in the Pacific Northwest market we'd been targeting. The financial projections looked solid, with minimal client overlap and significant growth potential. This could accelerate our expansion. Timeline by years, I noted, already mentally mapping integration scenarios. Exactly, Robert agreed, but it would require significant capital investment. He looked at me meaningfully. The board is exploring funding options, including potentially bringing on additional investment partners. I understood the implication immediately. As a 33% owner, any new investment would potentially dilute my stake unless I contributed proportionally to the acquisition funding. It was a pivotal moment. Did I want to maintain my ownership percentage, requiring another substantial personal investment, or would I accept dilution to enable company growth? How much are we talking about? I asked, already calculating what assets I might leverage. The original inheritance was long gone, but Pinnacle's success had provided healthy returns over the past 3 years. Robert named a figure that made me pause, significantly larger than my initial investment. The board would understand if you preferred to maintain your current capital contribution and accept proportional dilution, he added carefully. Your leadership value extends far beyond your financial stake. I considered the options, weighing the financial commitment against my vision for Pinnacle's future. I'd like to maintain my ownership percentage, I said finally. I believe in where we're heading, and I want my stake to reflect that commitment. Robert looked surprised, but pleased. Are you sure? It's a substantial amount. I'm sure. I've been part of building Pinnacle into what it is today. I want to be equally invested in what it becomes tomorrow. The decision felt right. A continuation of the choice I'd made 3 years ago, betting on myself and the company I believed in. The executive team meeting that followed focused on quarterly performance across departments, but I found my thoughts repeatedly returning to the acquisition opportunity. Expanding to Seattle would bring new challenges, new talent pools, new client possibilities. It would also test our carefully cultivated culture and systems. Done right, it could elevate Pinnacle to national prominence while maintaining the values that made us distinctive. After the meeting, I walked through the creative department, observing the teams at work. The energy was palpable, collaborative, focused, innovative. We'd hired a new creative director, Marcus, who handled day-to-day department leadership with a light touch and genuine respect for the team's expertise. The restructuring I'd implemented had paired senior strategists with creative teams, ensuring both strategic consistency and creative freedom. Amanda waved me over to her workstation, where she was finalizing social content for Alpine's spring campaign. What do you think of these carousel options? She asked, displaying 3 different approaches. The team is split between the lifestyle, focus, and the product detail sequences. I studied the options, noting how far Amanda had grown in her role over the past 6 months. Once hesitant to express opinions that conflicted with leadership, she now confidently presented alternatives and defended her creative choices. The lifestyle sequence tells a more compelling story, I observed. But what if we integrated product details more organically? Something like this. I sketched a quick storyboard showing how the 2 approaches might blend, creating a narrative that featured both authentic experiences and product functionality. Amanda's eyes lit up. That's brilliant. Authenticity without sacrificing information. I'll rework these today. This was the leadership model I'd established, collaborative rather than directive, building on team ideas rather than imposing my own vision. It contrasted sharply with James's approach, which had treated team members as executors rather than contributors. The results spoke for themselves. Higher creative quality, stronger team retention, and client feedback that consistently praised our authentic understanding of their brands. Later that afternoon, I received an unexpected email from Tom Reeves, my former colleague who had initially brought Alpine to Pinnacle. He'd moved on from Alpine 3 months ago, accepting a position as marketing director for Cascade Ventures, a venture capital firm specializing in sustainable startups. Sarah, hoping to connect about a potential opportunity, Cascade is building a portfolio of eco-conscious consumer brands, and we're looking for an agency partner who understands authentic, values-driven marketing. Your work with Alpine is exactly the approach we want. Coffee next week when I'm in Denver? The email represented exactly the kind of growth we'd been strategizing. Clients who sought us out specifically for our distinctive approach rather than us chasing them. I replied immediately, suggesting times for the meeting. As I was about to leave for the day, Nicole knocked on my open door. "Got a minute?" she asked, a folder tucked under her arm. "Of course," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. Nicole had been promoted to Director of Client Services, overseeing all account managers and serving as the bridge between client needs and creative execution. "I wanted to run something by you before the weekly status report," she began, opening her folder. "Remember that conversation we had about creating more transparent client reporting? I've been working with the digital team to develop a real-time dashboard that would give clients visibility into campaign performance metrics." She presented the prototype, an elegant, user-friendly interface that translated complex analytics into accessible insights. It embodied the values we'd been cultivating: transparency, partnership, and empowering clients with knowledge rather than mystifying our process. "This is excellent work, Nicole," I said sincerely. "It addresses the exact pain point we identified in client feedback. Have you tested it with any accounts yet?" She nodded. "A small pilot with Colorado craft breweries. They loved it, said it made them feel like genuine partners rather than just clients." Colorado Craft, the account that had indirectly led to my partnership stake during the recession. There was a pleasing symmetry in seeing them benefit from Pinnacle's evolution. "Let's roll this out to all major accounts," I decided, "and feature it in our new business presentations. It's a tangible demonstration of our collaborative approach." After Nicole left, I found myself reflecting on how far Pinnacle had come in 6 months. The toxic atmosphere of James's brief tenure had been completely transformed. Teams collaborated freely, leadership was accessible, and innovation flowed from a foundation of mutual respect. Most importantly, our work had never been stronger, authentic, strategic, and distinctive in an increasingly homogenized marketing landscape. The next morning, I arrived early to review the Westridge acquisition materials again, before meeting with our financial advisors. The Mountain View lobby was quiet, morning light streaming through the massive windows that framed the distant Rockies. I'd always loved this moment, the peaceful potential of a day not yet begun, the city slowly waking around our glass tower. As I stepped into the elevator, I checked my phone and found an email notification that made me pause. A message from James Wilson. In the 6 months since his departure, there had been no contact. Our separation agreement had been executed smoothly, and he had apparently moved on to an executive creative position with a New York agency. The subject line read simply, "Credit. Where due?" Curious, I opened the email as the elevator ascended to the 11th floor. Sarah wanted to share that Apex campaign just named the Alpine Sportswear launch as Outdoor Campaign of the Year. The write-up specifically praised the authentic storytelling approach and regional market integration. "Congratulations to you and the Pinnacle team. The vision you defended was clearly the right one. James." The message was unexpected, a professional acknowledgement I hadn't anticipated from someone whose ego had seemed impenetrable. I appreciated the gesture, though I noted he still couldn't quite bring himself to admit he had been wrong. Progress, not perfection. I stepped off the elevator into Pinnacle's reception area, now redesigned with a wall featuring client success stories, including the Alpine campaign that had just won industry recognition. The space reflected our evolved identity, warm yet professional, innovative yet grounded, successful yet humble. Rebecca was already at her desk, organizing materials for my morning meetings. "The financial team is ready whenever you are," she informed me. And Michelle from Alpine called. They want to discuss expanding the campaign to their international markets. International expansion. Exactly the growth direction we'd been hoping for with Alpine. "Tell them I'll call back this afternoon," I replied, gathering the acquisition documents. "And could you ask Marcus to join our creative review this afternoon? I want his perspective on the Seattle market." The financial meeting confirmed what I'd already concluded. Maintaining my ownership stake during the Westridge acquisition would require significant personal investment, but the long-term benefits outweighed the short-term financial stretch. I signed the preliminary commitment papers, officially putting myself on record as fully invested in Pinnacle's expansion plans. As I returned to my office, I spotted a young woman waiting nervously in reception, Eliza, the interview candidate. From yesterday, she stood when she saw me, smoothing her skirt with a gesture that reminded me of my own nervous habits during early job interviews. "Ms. Mitchell, Sarah," she corrected herself. "I just wanted to thank you personally for the opportunity to interview. Regardless of the outcome, meeting you and learning more about Pinnacle has been incredibly valuable." Her initiative impressed me, the willingness to go beyond expected protocols to express genuine interest. "Actually, Eliza, I'm glad you're here. We were planning to call you today. We'd like to offer you the associate strategist position." Her face lit up with genuine joy. "Really? Thank you. I can't tell you how excited I am about the possibility of learning from your team." "From what I've seen, I think the learning will go both ways," I replied, meaning it. Fresh perspectives were vital to innovation, especially from talent unencumbered by industry conventions. "HR will send the official offer this afternoon. We hope you'll accept." After Eliza left, practically floating with excitement, I continued to my office to prepare for the afternoon creative review. The wall behind my desk displayed framed highlights from Pinnacle's history, award-winning campaigns, major client launches, press features about our growth. Among them was a simple document that most visitors probably assumed was just another industry accolade, my original partnership agreement from 3 years ago. I kept it there not from ego, but as a reminder of the journey, how a moment of crisis had become an opportunity, how investment created ownership in more ways than financial, how standing firm for your value could transform not just your position, but an entire organization's culture. The leadership meeting that afternoon focused on integration planning for the Westridge acquisition. Robert had assembled a cross-functional team to handle everything from operational alignment to cultural integration. "The Seattle team is understandably concerned about maintaining their creative identity," Marcus reported. "They've built a strong reputation in the tech sector and don't want to be subsumed into a larger agency's approach." I nodded, understanding their concern all too well. "Let's be clear about our integration philosophy. This isn't about Pinnacle absorbing Westridge. It's about combining complementary strengths. Their tech expertise enhances our capabilities just as our lifestyle brand experience expands theirs." Robert looked pleased with this direction. "That's the approach I was hoping for. They need to feel like partners, not acquisitions." "Let's demonstrate that commitment concretely," I suggested. "What if we establish a joint innovation lab, a team drawn from both agencies focused on developing new approaches that blend our specialized expertise? It would create immediate collaboration rather than separate teams gradually getting to know each other." The idea gained immediate traction, team members building on the concept with increasing enthusiasm. By the end of the meeting, we had outlined a structured approach to integration that respected both agencies' strengths while creating something greater than either could achieve alone. As the team dispersed, Robert asked me to stay behind. "The board is impressed with your vision for the integration," he said once we were alone. "And your decision to maintain your ownership stake sends a powerful message about your commitment to Pinnacle's future." "I believe in what we're building," I replied simply. and I've learned the value of having both a voice and a vote in shaping an organization's direction. He nodded thoughtfully. You know, when James first started, I worried I'd made a mistake not promoting you directly to creative director. But watching how you've handled everything since, the Alpine situation, the department restructuring, now this acquisition, I realized the timing worked out perfectly. You're a stronger leader for having navigated those challenges. I might not have chosen that particular growth opportunity, I noted wryly, but I can't disagree with the outcome. The following week brought my coffee meeting with Tom from Cascade Ventures. We met at a small cafe near our office, the kind of authentic local business that embodied the values his venture portfolio championed. Thanks for making time, Sarah, he began after we'd exchanged pleasantries. I've been following Pinnacle's evolution since the Alpine campaign. What you've built there is exactly what our portfolio companies need: marketing that understands how to maintain authenticity while scaling. He explained that Cascade had invested in 7 eco-conscious consumer brands, with plans to add 5 more in the coming year. They ranged from sustainable outdoor gear to plant-based food products, each founded with genuine environmental commitments rather than superficial green marketing. The challenge is helping them grow without compromising the values that make them special, Tom explained. Too many sustainable brands either stay small and pure or scale up and sell out. We're trying to create a third path, principled growth. It aligned perfectly with the approach we'd been refining at Pinnacle, using authentic storytelling to build brands that maintained integrity across scale. That's essentially the philosophy we've built our agency around, I replied. Authenticity isn't a marketing angle, it's a business model. Tom smiled, clearly pleased with the alignment. That's exactly why I wanted to meet. Cascade is considering a master agency agreement that would offer our portfolio companies preferred access to Pinnacle's services. It would give early-stage brands professional marketing support they couldn't otherwise afford, while providing Pinnacle with a pipeline of innovative, values-aligned clients. The opportunity was significant, not just financially, but strategically. Working with startups would keep us connected to emerging trends and innovative thinking, while our experience could help these value-driven companies avoid the typical growth pitfalls. I'd want to make sure we can properly service multiple portfolio companies while maintaining our standards, I said, thinking aloud. Perhaps a dedicated team structure with specialized expertise in sustainable brand development. Tom nodded, enthusiastically. That's exactly the kind of thoughtful approach I was hoping for. Not just jumping at the revenue, but considering how to deliver genuine value. By the end of our meeting, we had outlined the framework for a potential partnership that would start with 2 portfolio companies and potentially expand to the entire Cascade network. It represented exactly the kind of purposeful growth I'd envisioned for Pinnacle. Expansion rooted in values alignment rather than mere opportunity. The following month was a whirlwind of activity, finalizing the Westridge acquisition, setting up the integration teams, designing the structure for our Cascade Ventures partnership, and maintaining excellence across our existing client work. I found myself energized rather than exhausted by the pace, each new development building on our core strengths while pushing us toward new capabilities. As we prepared for the official announcement of the Westridge acquisition, I was invited to speak at the Denver Business Leadership Forum, an annual event featuring executives from the city's most successful companies. My assigned topic was Authentic Leadership in a Disruptive Age, a subject that resonated deeply given Pinnacle's recent journey. The evening of the event, I stood at the podium, looking out at a room filled with business leaders from across industries. Among them were several Pinnacle clients, Robert and our executive team, and somewhat surprisingly, my former colleagues from early in my career, including my first mentor who had helped guide my professional development. Leadership is often framed as a position of authority, I began, setting aside my prepared notes to speak from experience. We talk about leading teams, leading initiatives, leading industries. But the most powerful leadership I've experienced has little to do with authority and everything to do with ownership. Not just in the financial sense, but in the profound commitment to something you believe in. I shared Pinnacle's story, not the dramatic confrontation with James, but the underlying journey of building an agency rooted in authentic values, weathering challenges, and emerging stronger through principled adaptation rather than reactive change. True ownership means having both the confidence to stand firm on your core values and the humility to recognize when evolution is necessary, I continued. It means investing not just your resources, but your identity in what you're building. And most importantly, it means creating space for others to experience that same sense of ownership and investment. As I concluded my remarks, I found myself reflecting on how far I'd come from the senior strategist who had quietly written a check to save her company during a recession. The journey from silent partner to visible leader hadn't been straightforward or easy, but each challenge had clarified rather than clouded my vision for what leadership could be. The applause was gratifying, but the conversations afterward meant more, particularly the young women who approached to ask about building careers with both ambition and integrity. I recognized in them the same questions I'd wrestled with. Years ago, the same desire to succeed without compromising values. One question particularly stood out from a young marketing coordinator at a local firm. "How did you know when to speak up and when to wait?" she asked. "I see things that could be improved at my company, but I'm not sure if I have the standing to say anything." I considered her question carefully, thinking about the many moments when I could have spoken up sooner during James's tenure, and the strategic choice to wait for the right moment. "Value isn't about position," I finally replied. "It's about perspective and preparation. Document what you see, develop solutions, not just critiques, and choose the moment when your insight will be received as contribution rather than criticism." She nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. But what if no one listens? Then you have valuable information about whether that organization deserves your talent," I said simply. "The right place values substance over status and recognizes that insight can come from anywhere in an organization." Later that evening, as the event wound down, Robert found me by the reception area. "Excellent speech," he said, raising his glass slightly. "Especially the part about ownership transcending financial investment." The whole room was nodding along. I smiled, appreciating his support. I meant every word. Building something meaningful is about so much more than titles or equity, though those certainly help, I added with a small laugh. He grew more serious, lowering his voice. "You know, watching you these past months has changed how I think about Pinnacle's future. The succession planning I've been considering. I'd like to discuss accelerating that timeline, with you taking on more of the chief executive responsibilities." The suggestion caught me by surprise. We'd discussed expanded leadership roles, but not a complete transition to CEO. "That's a significant change from our previous conversations," I noted, measuring my response. "I'd want to make sure the timing is right for the organization, especially with the Westridge integration ahead." "Of course," he agreed. "Nothing immediate, but seeing your vision for integrating Westridge, the Cascade partnership, how you've unified the team after James, I'm increasingly confident that Pinnacle's future should be in your hands sooner rather than later." The conversation continued as we walked toward the exit, discussing potential timelines and transition plans. The possibility felt both daunting and right, the natural progression of the commitment I'd made first as a silent partner, then as an advocate, and now as a leader. Outside, Denver's skyline glittered against the night sky, the mountains a dark silhouette beyond. I remembered, standing on my balcony 6 months ago, watching the same view with uncertainty about my professional future. How differently I saw everything now, not just my role at Pinnacle, but my understanding of what leadership truly meant. The journey from silent partner to potential CEO hadn't been about accumulating power or authority. It had been about Recognizing the full value of what I brought to the table, the strategic insight, the principled leadership, the genuine care for both the work and the people who created it. James's attempt to diminish that value had backfired spectacularly, ultimately revealing strengths I might never have fully claimed without the challenge. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the question that young marketing coordinator had asked me, "How do you know when to speak up and when to wait?" The answer I hadn't quite articulated was that it depended on what you were protecting, your ego or your values. When James had belittled me personally, I had remained calm and strategic. But when he threatened the company I believed in and the people who depended on it, I had found a voice that couldn't be silenced. That was the lesson I carried forward as I guided Pinnacle toward its expanded future. Never confuse silence with weakness. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who actually owns it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.